You notice it first in your dreams, not a nightmare, but something far worse. A dream that feels more real than waking life. You're apprenticed to Navigator House Belisarius, 3 months into your first deep void journey aboard the merchant vessel Faithful Prophet. The ship groans around you as it cuts through the warp, its gellar field humming with the constant strain of keeping reality at bay. But tonight, as you drift towards sleep in your cramped apprentice quarters, something different happens. The walls of your cabin begin to breathe. At first, you convince yourself it's exhaustion. The recycled air tastes metallic on your tongue, and the steady thrum of the ship's engines has been your lullaby for weeks. But as you watch, the metal bulkheads expand and contract with a rhythm that matches no machinery you know. It's organic, alive, and impossibly it synchronizes with your own heartbeat. You sit up, and the sensation intensifies. Colors seem more vivid than they should be in the dim lumens of your cabin. The red warning light near your door pulses not just crimson, but with depths of scarlet that your eyes have never seen before. You can taste the light on your tongue, copper pennies dissolved in aged wine. The sound of your own breathing echoes strangely, as if coming from somewhere both inside and outside your lungs. This is when you first feel it, the touch. Ice-cold fingers, delicate as spider silk, trace along the surface of your thoughts. Not painful, quite the opposite. The sensation is almost pleasant, like cool water running over fevered skin. These ethereal fingers explore the architecture of your mind with curious gentleness, mapping corridors of memory you didn't know existed, opening doors to chambers of perception that have been locked since birth. You know you should be terrified. Every piece of Imperial doctrine, every whispered warning from the senior crew members, every prayer you've memorized tells you this is wrong. But instead you feel expanded, enhanced. As if you've been living your entire life with only half your senses functional, and now, finally, you can see the world as it truly is. The walls aren't just breathing, they're singing. A harmony so complex and beautiful that human ears were never meant to hear it, yet somehow you do. Each note carries meanings that language cannot express, concepts that slide through your consciousness like silk ribbons made of starlight. You understand, without knowing how, that this music has been playing around you your entire life. You've simply lacked the ability to perceive it until now. You rise from your bunk, bare feet touching the deck plating, and the metal feels warm against your skin. No, not warm. Aware. The ship itself seems to recognize your new state, welcoming you into a deeper understanding of existence. Through the thin walls, you can sense the dreams of your fellow crew members, each mind a flickering candle in an ocean of darkness. Their thoughts brush against yours like gentle waves, and for a moment, you experience what it means to truly connect with another human being. But then you notice something that makes your enhanced perception falter. In the corner of your vision, just beyond the reach of your new sight, shadows move with purpose. They're not cast by any light source you can identify, and they seem to watch you with an intelligence that feels ancient and hungry. When you turn to look directly at them, they vanish, but you can feel their presence pressing against the edges of your awareness. The senior crew members you remember now. They always avoid eye contact after emerging from the warp. Navigator Tertius Vex, whose duties require him to guide the ship through the Imperium, carries himself like a man bearing invisible wounds. His hands shake when he thinks no one is watching, and he whispers prayers in languages that predate the Imperium. You've seen him flinch at shadows that don't exist, heard him weep in the Navigator's spire when he thought himself alone. Now you begin to understand why. Because as the hours pass and the beautiful sensations continue, you notice changes. Subtle at first, a word that feels foreign in your mouth despite knowing you've spoken it 1,000 times before. A face in a memory that seems slightly wrong, features shifted in ways you can't quite identify. The taste of your favorite rations has changed, carrying undertones of something organic and earthy that reminds you of soil after rain, or flesh after decay. You try to write down your experiences, thinking documentation might help you understand what's happening. But as your stylus moves across the data slate, the words that appear aren't quite the ones you intended to write. Close enough that casual reading would miss the differences, but wrong in ways that make your enhanced perception itch with discomfort. Your own handwriting looks alien, as if someone else has been using your hand to practice their penmanship. The faithful prophet continues its journey through the warp, and each day brings new revelations. You discover you can sense the emotional states of nearby crew members, feel their fears and hopes as if they were your own. You begin to see patterns in the random static of the ship's communication, arrays of patterns that seem to spell out messages in languages that exist only in the spaces between thoughts. Sleep becomes your refuge and your torment. In dreams, you walk through crystalline cities that spiral impossibly upward, their spires piercing realities you lack names for. You converse with beings of living light who share cosmic secrets in exchange for memories you thought were private. They show you the birth of stars and the death of civilizations, painting beauty across the cosmos in colors that make your waking world seem drained of life. But when morning comes, you notice more changes. Your reflection in the polished metal surfaces looks sharper somehow, more focused, as if something behind your eyes has awakened and is looking out through them. Your shadow falls at angles that don't match the light sources around you, and sometimes in the peripheral vision of your enhanced sight, you catch glimpses of that other woman, the one with eyes like starlight who claims to be your mother. You know she isn't real. You remember your actual mother, her weathered hands and gentle voice, the way she sang lullabies that smelled of lavender and home. But this other woman, this beautiful intruder in your memories, feels so vivid that your birth mother seems like a faded photograph by comparison. She speaks to you in dreams, offering comfort and guidance, teaching you to embrace the changes happening within you. Evolution, she whispers, her voice like crystal bells ringing in cathedral spaces. Not corruption. You're becoming what you were always meant to be. 3 weeks into your journey, you realize that your fellow apprentices have begun to avoid you. They won't meet your eyes during meals, and conversations die when you approach. At first, you assume it's jealousy. After all, your enhanced abilities have made you more efficient at your duties, more insightful in your observations. But then you overhear Navigator Vex speaking with the ship's captain in hushed, urgent tones. The girl shows signs of deep exposure, he says, his voice carrying the weight of experience you don't want to contemplate. We should consider containment protocols. Containment protocols. The words chill you more than the touch of those ethereal fingers ever did. You know what containment means in the Imperial Navy. You've seen the sealed compartments, the ones that are never opened, where sounds echo that aren't quite human anymore. But here's what the Imperium doesn't tell you about warp exposure. It's not the corruption that kills you first. It's the awareness of what you're becoming. Because as you stand there in the shadows of the corridor, listening to your fate being decided by men who fear what you've become, you realize that you can hear all of it. Not just their words, but their thoughts, their memories, their dreams. Navigator Vex has seen this progression countless times before. In his mind, you can see the file's detailed documentation of souls consumed by incremental degrees, charts mapping the dissolution of human consciousness with scientific precision. And in that moment of terrible clarity, as you feel something vast and hungry stirring in the depths of your enhanced awareness, you understand that your journey has only just begun. The beautiful sensations, the expanded perception, the cosmic revelations, they were never gifts. They were preparation. Something is making room inside your soul, renovating the architecture of your consciousness to accommodate a presence that defies comprehension. And the most horrifying part isn't that you can't stop it. It's that you're no longer certain you want to. To understand what happens when the warp devours a soul piece by piece, you must first abandon any comforting notion that this process is random or chaotic. What you're experiencing isn't some cosmic accident or divine punishment. It's systematic, methodical, scientific in its precision. Imagine, if you will, that your soul is a house, not the simple structure you might envision, but a vast architectural marvel spanning dimensions of existence you can't normally perceive. This house has foundations built from your earliest memories, walls constructed from your core beliefs and values, rooms filled with the furniture of your relationships and experiences. The roof is your hopes and dreams, protecting everything below from the infinite sky of possibility. Now imagine that cosmic entities have decided this house requires renovation. They don't arrive with sledgehammers and wrecking balls. They come with blueprints drawn in languages that predate matter itself, architectural plans that make your current spiritual structure seem quaint and inefficient. They begin their work with subtle alterations. A window moved here, a door relocated there. Changes so small that you might not notice them immediately, but significant enough to alter how light falls through the rooms of your consciousness. Inquisitor Savant Matthias Crain has spent 47 years documenting these renovations. In the deepest vaults beneath the fortress monastery of Titan, his research chambers house thousands of test subjects in various stages of spiritual reconstruction. If you could see his files, you would understand that what you're experiencing has been cataloged with the same clinical precision that medical texts use to describe cancer. Stage 1. Sensory enhancement and perceptual modification, reads one of his reports. The parchment stained with substances you hope are merely ink. Subject exhibits increased sensitivity to warp fluctuations, often interpreted as improved intuition or expanded awareness. Subjects typically report this stage as pleasant or beneficial. Duration: 3-6 weeks depending on initial exposure intensity and soul architecture complexity. Crain's methodology is ruthless in its thoroughness. He measures corruption not in abstract terms of good and evil, but in precise degradation percentages. Soul integrity, consciousness coherence, identity retention factors. To him, you are not a person experiencing a spiritual crisis. You are data point sigma 7743, a resource being consumed at a rate of 0.3% per standard Terran day. His charts map exactly how different types of souls respond to warp exposure. The faithful last longer than the cynical, but not by much. Children's souls, with their malleable neural pathways, are consumed more quickly, but often retain fragments of personality longer. The elderly, their spiritual architecture hardened by decades of experience, resist initial alteration but collapse catastrophically once the process reaches critical mass. The Imperium has turned the consumption of human souls into an actuarial science. Stage 2. Memory revision and emotional realignment, continues another file, this one secured behind locks that require 3 different Inquisitors' authorization to open. Subject's personal history undergoes systematic editing. Original memories are not destroyed, but overwritten with alternatives that create psychological dependency on the corrupting influence. Subjects often report feeling more like themselves than ever before during this phase. Crain documents the process with the detached fascination of a scholar studying extinct civilizations. His subjects, volunteers, criminals, and unfortunates who drew the wrong attention, provide him with real-time data on spiritual dissolution. He monitors their brain patterns, measures the electromagnetic fluctuations around their cells, and conducts regular interviews to track their psychological degradation. But what makes Crain's research truly horrifying isn't its clinical nature. It's how useful the Imperium finds it. The data feeds into Imperial strategic planning. Fleet commanders consult corruption timetables when planning extended warp voyages, calculating acceptable losses based on crew soul durability ratings. Navigator houses use the information to breed more resistant bloodlines, treating human genetic material like crops to be optimized for harvest efficiency. The Inquisition employs it to determine interrogation schedules. After all, why waste time questioning a subject whose soul will be consumed beyond usefulness within standard weeks? Your soul, like the souls of billions before you, has been reduced to a consumption timeline. Stage 3. Personality fragmentation and identity dissolution, reads a file marked with seals you don't recognize, their wax still warm despite being centuries old. Subject's sense of self begins to compartmentalize. Original personality becomes one voice among many as the corrupting influence introduces additional consciousness fragments. Subjects frequently report conversations with other versions of themselves. The process mirrors radiation poisoning in its inexorable progression. Just as gamma rays tear through cellular DNA, leaving behind cascading failures that kill the body from within, warp exposure shreds the quantum strings that hold your soul together. The damage accumulates faster than any natural healing process can repair it. Each day brings new micro-tears in your spiritual fabric, tiny gaps where alien influences can take root and grow. Crain's subjects undergo daily examinations designed to measure these tears. Psychic probes map the boundaries of their consciousness, identifying which thoughts still belong to the original personality and which have been edited. The savant has perfected techniques for observing soul degradation that make physical vivisection seem merciful by comparison. His facility operates with the efficiency of a production line. New subjects arrive, undergo baseline measurements, and enter the controlled exposure chambers. Crain monitors their progression through the stages, documenting each milestone of their dissolution. When they reach terminal corruption, stage 7, complete spiritual integration, their consciousness is harvested for study before their bodies are incinerated. The truly damning evidence lies in his comparative studies. Crain has exposed souls to different types of warp entities, measuring which corruptions progress fastest and which leave the most exploitable remnants. He's determined optimal exposure durations for maintaining subject consciousness during consumption. He's even developed techniques for accelerating the process when research schedules demand it. Reading his work, you realize that every sensation you've experienced, the enhanced perception, the beautiful dreams, the expanding awareness follows patterns he documented decades ago. Your individual experience of corruption isn't unique or personal. You're following a predetermined path laid out in Imperial databases, tracked and predicted with mathematical precision. The ultimate revelation comes in a file locked behind security measures that would impress a hive city's armory. Charts and graphs display soul consumption rates across the Imperium's territories, projecting future harvest yields based on population density and warp storm frequency. The document treats human spiritual essence like any other strategic resource: oil reserves to be extracted, mineral deposits to be mined. At the bottom of this file, in Crain's precise handwriting, lies the final horror. Estimated total soul consumption rate across Imperial space, 847,000 per standard day. Projected increase due to expanding warp storm activity, 23% annually. Recommendation: accept losses as operationally necessary for continued Imperial function. Your soul, your memories, your love for family and friends, your hopes for the future, everything that makes you who you are is listed as an acceptable operational loss in the Imperium's eternal war for survival. The corruption consuming you isn't some tragic accident or cosmic injustice. It's a calculated sacrifice, measured and planned and filed away in databases that span worlds. But perhaps the most chilling detail in Crain's research isn't the systematic nature of soul consumption. It's his notation that the process can be reversed, but only in the earliest stages and only at costs the Imperium considers prohibitive. Purification is possible. Salvation exists. The technology and techniques are documented, tested, and available. The Imperium simply chooses not to use them. Because in the galaxy's most brutal calculation, it's more efficient to let souls be consumed than to save them. You are not a victim of chaos or evil. You are inventory being depleted according to schedule. Communication Officer 3rd Class Lyra Voss doesn't realize she's losing her childhood until she can't remember her sister's birthday. You watch her story unfold like viewing your own life through a cracked mirror, because what happens to Lyra is happening to every soul the warp touches. She sits at her station aboard the Imperial Navy vessel Righteous Fury, fingers dancing across communication arrays with practiced precision, when she tries to send a personal message home. a simple birthday greeting to her younger sister, Myra. But as she begins to compose the message, her fingers hesitate over the keyboard. When was Myra born? The date should be burned into her memory. They celebrated together for over 2 decades before Lyra joined the Imperial Navy. But the harder she concentrates, the more elusive the information becomes. She knows it was autumn on Vaccinide Prime. She remembers falling leaves and the smell of harvest festivals, but the specific day slips away like water through her fingers. This is how it begins, not with dramatic revelation, but with tiny absences that gnaw at the edges of certainty. Lyra tells herself it's exhaustion. The righteous fury has been in the warp for 6 months, longer than most ships dare venture into that realm of madness and dream. The crew suffers from the strained sleep disorders, anxiety attacks, minor hallucinations. Forgetting a birthday seems minor compared to Bosun Garrett's nightly screaming fits or Navigator Primus Valdris's habit of speaking to voices only he can hear. But you can see what Lyra cannot. Her memory isn't failing. It's being edited. The process works like a master craftsman restoring an ancient painting. The original artwork remains intact, but certain elements are carefully painted over, replaced with images more suited to the restorer's vision. Lyra's memories of growing up with Myra aren't destroyed, they're revised. The sister she remembers begins to change in subtle ways. A different laugh here, altered facial features there. Small modifications that her conscious mind doesn't register, but that fundamentally shift the emotional resonance of her past. You watch her over the following weeks as the changes accelerate. She receives a recorded message from home, her family's voices crackling through the ship's communication system. Her parents speak warmly of Myra's recent promotion in the Planetary Defense Force, sharing details about achievements and relationships that should spark recognition in Lyra's mind. Instead, she listens with growing confusion. They must be talking about someone else, she mutters to herself, replaying the message. Myra never showed interest in military service. But the woman in the family photographs displayed on her desk, the sister she supposedly grew up with, wears a PDF uniform. Has, apparently, always worn it. Lyra stares at the images, her enhanced perception picking up details that her original memories never contained. The uniform's insignia indicates specialized training in void warfare. The sister in these photographs has scars on her hands that suggest weapon maintenance experience. Her posture shows military bearing that takes years to develop. When did Myra join the PDF? How could Lyra forget something so significant about her own sister's life? The answer comes in dreams where memory and reality bleed together like watercolors in rain. You feel Lyra's confusion as she experiences childhood scenes that contradict everything she thought she knew about her family. In these dreams, Myra was always destined for military service, always the responsible one, always the sister who worried about Lyra's tendency toward rebellion and risk-taking. But rebellion against what? Lyra has served the Imperium faithfully her entire adult life, followed every regulation, excelled at every assignment. The sister in her dreams speaks of concerns that make no sense in the context of who Lyra knows herself to be. You are always drawn to dangerous knowledge, dream, Myra says, her face wearing expressions that feel alien yet familiar. Even as children, you'd sneak away to read prohibited texts, ask questions that made the priests uncomfortable. I worried you'd fall in with the wrong influences. Lyra wakes from these dreams with the taste of forbidden books on her tongue, though she can't remember ever reading anything but approved Imperial texts. Her hands move in patterns she doesn't recognize, tracing symbols that her conscious mind has never seen but that feel as natural as breathing. She catches herself humming melodies that don't exist in any Imperial hymnals, songs that seem to come from somewhere deeper than memory. The erosion accelerates. Coworkers mention shared experiences that Lyra can't recall, events from her training period that should be burned into her mind, but feel like stories about someone else's life. Her service record, when she reviews it, contains commendations for actions she doesn't remember taking and reprimands for infractions that seem completely unlike her character. Remember that time during the Cadia defense exercises when you questioned the chaplain about demon psychology? Asks senior communications specialist Tors during a routine shift change. Command wasn't happy about your intellectual curiosity regarding heretical subjects. Lyra stares at him in bewilderment. She has no memory of such an incident, no recollection of ever showing interest in demon studies. But when she checks her service files, there it is. A formal reprimand for pursuing unauthorized research into warp entity behavioral patterns during her advanced training on Cadia. The document bears her signature, her fingerprints, her DNA markers. According to every official record, she absolutely did these things. But in her mind, they never happened. You feel her growing panic as she realizes the scope of what's being stolen from her. It isn't just childhood memories or training incidents. Her entire understanding of who she is as a person is being systematically rewritten. The woman she thought herself to be, the relationship she believed she had with her family, the path she thought led her to Imperial service, all of it shifts and changes like reflections in troubled water. She begins keeping a journal, desperately trying to document her real memories before they can be altered further. But when she reads her own entries from previous days, she finds records of thoughts she doesn't remember thinking, experiences she doesn't remember having. Her own handwriting describes interests in forbidden knowledge, fascination with warp phenomena, and childhood incidents involving psychic manifestations. The journal becomes evidence of a life she never lived, written in her own hand. The most horrifying moment comes when she tries to remember her mother's face. Closing her eyes, concentrating with all her will, she reaches for one of her most treasured memories, her mother's gentle smile, the way sunlight caught her hair during afternoon conversations on their family's agricultural plot. But the face that appears in her mind is wrong. Beautiful but terrible, with eyes that reflect starlight and features too perfect for human genetics. This false mother speaks to her in languages that predate the Imperium, offering comfort and guidance in tones that feel more natural than her birth language. She explains that Lyra's confusion is temporary, a necessary adjustment as her consciousness expands to accommodate greater truths. The memories being replaced were limitations, barriers preventing her from achieving her true potential. "Your birth family loved you," the false mother says, her voice like crystal bells in cathedral spaces. "But they could never understand what you were meant to become. We are preparing you for reunion with those who truly comprehend your nature." Lyra tries to resist, clinging to fragments of authentic memory with desperate determination. She focuses on concrete details, the texture of her real mother's calloused hands, the specific way her father laughed at his own jokes, the sound of her sister's voice during childhood arguments. But each time she grasps these memories, they slip away like smoke, replaced by alternatives that feel more vivid and emotionally resonant than the originals ever did. The replacement memories aren't random insertions. They're carefully crafted to create psychological dependency on whatever is consuming her soul. The false childhood makes her current situation feel like coming home rather than being violated. The edited relationships reframe her growing alienation from her real family as natural evolution rather than tragic loss. Every revision serves to make her more receptive to the changes happening within her consciousness. 6 months into her journey aboard the Righteous Fury, Lyra receives word that her family has died in a farming accident on Vaccinide Prime. She should feel devastated, heartbroken, consumed by grief for the loss of everything she held dear. Instead, she feels relief. The people who died were strangers wearing familiar faces, actors playing roles in a life she'd outgrown. Their deaths remove obstacles to her transformation, clearing away attachments that had become burdensome. But in quiet moments, when she thinks no one is observing, you can see tears streaming down her face. Some part of her, buried deep beneath the layers of revision and replacement, mourns for a sister whose birthday she can no longer remember, parents whose faces have been stolen, and a childhood that existed only in memories now marked for deletion. The woman crying doesn't know why she grieves, can't identify what she's lost. But something in the deepest chambers of her soul recognizes that it has been robbed of everything precious, and weeps for treasures whose names have been forgotten. What makes this horror truly unbearable isn't the theft itself. It's the perfection of the replacement. The false memories feel more real than the originals, more emotionally satisfying, more consistent with the person she's becoming. Fighting to remember her authentic past feels like trying to hold onto a nightmare when offered beautiful dreams. And sometimes, in her darkest moments of clarity, Lyra wonders if the memories being stolen were ever real at all, or if she's simply discovering truths about herself that were always there, waiting to be acknowledged. The doubt, you realize, is part of the consumption, because a soul that questions its own authenticity has already begun to surrender its claim to existence. Sergeant Darius Kern discovers beauty in the sound of screaming on a Thursday morning during the siege of Hive Primus Mortalis. You witness his transformation through senses that have learned to perceive corruption as it flowers in human consciousness. He crouches behind the rubble of what was once a shrine to the Emperor, bolt pistol steady in his grip, as he awaits the next wave of heretic assault. The screams rising from the burning Underhive should horrify him, civilian voices twisted by pain and terror, the death cries of innocents caught in warfare's grinding machinery. Instead, Darius finds himself listening with a connoisseur's appreciation for their tonal qualities. That soprano note of pure anguish from a trapped child, exquisite in its clarity. The bass rumble of a dying man's final breath, perfectly pitched to harmonize with the cracking flames. The staccato burst of a woman discovering her family's corpses, percussive elements that add rhythm to the symphony of destruction. Darius shakes his head, trying to dispel these thoughts. Good soldiers don't think such things. Loyal servants of the Emperor find no pleasure in civilian suffering. But the more he attempts to suppress his aesthetic appreciation for the sounds of agony, the more beautiful they become. This is how the reshaping begins, not with sudden evil, but with gradual shifts in what feels right. You follow Darius through the campaign as his desires undergo systematic revision. Initially, the changes manifest as enhanced tactical awareness. He begins to recognize patterns in battlefield chaos that his training never taught him to see. The way blood spatters create abstract art across broken walls. The mathematical precision with which shrapnel carves geometric patterns through human flesh. The elegant choreography of combat, where death and violence dance together in measures older than civilization. His fellow guardsmen notice his improved performance before they recognize its source. Darius anticipates enemy movements with uncanny accuracy, positions his squad to maximize both tactical advantage and aesthetic impact. When he directs artillery strikes, he considers not just military effectiveness but the visual composition created by explosions against the Hive City's skyline. "Beautiful work, Sergeant," Commander Voss tells him after a particularly successful engagement. "Your fire coordination was artistry." The word artistry resonates in frequencies that Darius's enhanced hearing can perceive. Yes, that's exactly what it was. Not mere military action, but creative expression using mediums of flesh and flame. The realization doesn't disturb him as it should. Instead, it fills him with the warm satisfaction of recognition. Finally, someone understands what he's becoming. But you can see what Darius cannot yet acknowledge. His victories aren't products of improved tactical skill. They're the result of planning engagements to maximize suffering rather than minimize casualties. The positions he chooses create killing fields designed for prolonged agony rather than quick deaths. His artillery coordinates target structural points that will collapse slowly, trapping civilians in debris where their screams can be heard for hours. He's becoming an artist, and his medium is human pain. The transformation accelerates when he encounters Sister Orlia of the Order of the Sacred Rose. She lies dying in a crater created by his perfectly placed melta charges, her power armor cracked open like an eggshell to reveal the mortal flesh within. Most soldiers would see tragedy in her wound, a faithful servant of the Emperor cut down in her prime. Darius sees something entirely different. The way blood pools in the ceramite's broken edges creates patterns that remind him of rose petals scattered on marble. Her labored breathing produces rhythms that complement the distant sound of artillery bombardment. The contrast between her pale skin and the burned metal surrounding her evokes classical paintings he's never studied but somehow remembers. "Help me," she whispers, her voice barely audible above the battle's din. Darius kneels beside her, and for a moment his old self surfaces. The man he was before the siege began reaches for his medical kit, driven by duty and compassion to ease her suffering. But that impulse dies as he truly sees what she's become under his aesthetic gaze. She's perfect exactly as she is. Her pain adds depth to the composition. Her struggle against death creates dramatic tension that wouldn't exist if he healed her. Helping her would ruin the artistry of the moment, destroy something beautiful in service of mundane mercy. So he watches her die instead, memorizing each nuance of her final moments with the dedication of a scholar studying masterworks. "Thank you," she breathes with her last exhale, mistaking his presence for comfort. Darius feels something that might once have been guilt twist in his chest, but the sensation transforms before it can take root. Guilt assumes he's done something wrong, but how can creating beauty be wrong? How can appreciating the universe's hidden artistry be sinful? The Emperor himself is an artist on the grandest scale, painting human destiny across the cosmos with brushstrokes of war and suffering. Surely Darius is simply learning to see as his god sees. The campaign continues, and his reputation grows. Other regiments request his tactical consultation, drawn by his uncanny ability to achieve objectives with minimal Imperial casualties. They don't realize that his strategies work because he's optimizing for entirely different goals. Where they see military efficiency, Darius pursues aesthetic perfection. Where they calculate acceptable losses, he composes symphonies of screaming. His personal relationships begin to reflect his changing nature. The woman he married on leave 6 months ago, Elena, a librarian on Cadia Prime, sends regular Vox messages filled with love and longing. Her voice once comforted him during the darkest moments of deployment. Now it sounds flat and colorless compared to the rich textures of battlefield audio. Her expressions of affection seem naive, childish in their simplicity. How can she speak of love when she's never heard the perfect harmony created by a battalion dying in unison? How can she claim to understand beauty when she's never watched a city burn from exactly the right angle to appreciate the interplay of light and shadow across collapsing spires? When Elena's messages arrive, Darius finds himself editing them. Not consciously, but his enhanced perception automatically processes her words through filters that make them more suitable. The gentle woman speaking of gardens and books becomes someone who understands his artistic development, who encourages his exploration of aesthetic boundaries previously considered taboo. "I've been reading about the great military campaigns of history," the revised Elena tells him during a particularly memorable message. "The way commanders like Matthias created beauty through controlled destruction. I think I'm beginning to understand what you're becoming out there." The real Elena never said those words, never thought those thoughts. But the version that speaks to him now feels more authentic than the woman he married, more compatible with the person he's evolving into. The breaking point comes during the final assault on the hive's upper levels. Darius leads his squad through corridors filled with fleeing civilians, non-combatants who pose no tactical threat but whose presence creates opportunities. His men expect him to establish safe evacuation routes, to minimize collateral damage as they pursue military objectives. Instead, Darius orders the corridor sealed. "Sir." Corporal Hayes questions, his voice tight with confusion. "The evacuation routes will remain closed," Darius completes, his tone carrying authority that brooks no argument. "We need proper acoustics for the next phase." What follows is a masterpiece of orchestrated terror. The trapped civilians become instruments in a composition that builds from whispered prayers through rising panic to crescendo of pure despair. Darius conducts the symphony through precise placement of small explosives, creating structural collapses that generate exactly the right tonal qualities. His squad, trained to obey without question, becomes his orchestra playing a score written in flesh and fear. The music reaches its climax when the final support beam fails and the entire section collapses. The sound that rises from the rubble, hundreds of voices joining in perfect harmony of agony, creates a moment of transcendent beauty that brings tears to Darius's eyes. In that instant of aesthetic ecstasy, he experiences a revelation that changes everything. This isn't corruption of his desires, it's purification. He spent his entire life settling for pale imitations of true beauty, accepting inferior art because he lacked the vision to perceive perfection. The universe itself is an artist, and suffering is its chosen medium. War, death, pain, these aren't necessary evils to be minimized, but expressions of cosmic creativity to be celebrated. Standing in the ruins of his masterpiece, surrounded by the broken bodies of innocents he's transformed into art, Darius finally understands what he's become. Not a monster, not a villain, an aesthete, a connoisseur of the sublime, a student learning to appreciate the universe's true nature from teachers whose wisdom transcends human morality. And the most horrifying part isn't his transformation itself, it's how right it feels, how complete, how much more alive he feels now that he's learned to find beauty in places where his old self saw only ugliness. When Alina's next message arrives, he listens with ears that can hear the music hidden in her voice, the slight tremor that suggests tears, the carefully controlled breathing that indicates she's reading from prepared notes, the background sounds of a world growing distant from his new reality. She's become part of his old life, a relic of the person he used to be before enlightenment showed him truth. He deletes the message without responding, not out of cruelty, but out of mercy. The man she loved is gone, replaced by something that sees beauty in places love cannot follow. But sometimes, in the quiet hours before dawn, you catch glimpses of the original Darius trapped somewhere deep inside the artist he's become. That buried man weeps for Alina, for the civilians he's murdered, for the soul he's traded for aesthetic transcendence. His tears add their own note to the symphony surrounding him, a minor key of loss that makes the overall composition even more beautiful. The artist appreciates even his own grief, finding in it another source of inspiration for the masterpieces yet to come. Sanctioned Psyker Matthias Crain begins to lose himself on the 7th day of the Jericho Reach campaign, when he realizes he's been having conversations with people who died centuries before he was born. You experience his dissolution through senses that have learned to perceive consciousness as fluid architecture, watching as the walls between self and other crumble like sand castles before an incoming tide. Matthias sits in the modified cargo hold that serves as his sanctum aboard the strike cruiser Iron Resolve, surrounded by psychic dampening fields and protective wards. But the barriers designed to keep unwanted influences out have become porous, allowing thoughts and memories that aren't his own to seep through the cracks in reality. At first, he assumes the voices are phantoms, psychic echoes left behind by previous occupants of the ship. The Imperial Navy has a long tradition of sanctioned Psykers dying badly, their final moments imprinted on the metal around them like psychic bloodstains. Matthias has learned to tune out such background noise, treating it as occupational hazard rather than genuine communication. But these voices respond when he speaks to them. The warp currents are particularly turbulent today, observes a woman whose accent belongs to dialect patterns that died out 300 years ago. I can feel the astronomican's light flickering like a candle in a storm. Matthias looks around his empty sanctum, seeing no one but feeling her presence with perfect clarity. She's elderly, he realizes, her psychic signature bearing the weight of decades spent channeling forces that consume human minds like acid. Her thoughts carry memories of battles he's only read about in historical texts, the Third Tyrannic War, the Macharian Crusade, campaigns that ended before his birth. "Who are you?" he asks, though he suspects he already knows the answer. "Astropath Prime Lyra Voss," she responds, her mental voice tinged with amusement at his confusion. "Or I was before the warp claimed me. Now I'm something else, as you will be in time." This is when Matthias first understands that what he's experiencing isn't communication with external spirits. These voices belong to minds that have been absorbed into whatever is consuming his own consciousness. They're previous courses in a feast that has been going on for millennia, and they retain enough coherence to offer guidance to the next course being prepared. The realization should terrify him. Instead, it brings a strange comfort. He's been feeling increasingly isolated aboard the Iron Resolve, his psychic abilities making him necessary but feared among the regular crew. The prospect of eternal communion with others who understand his burden seems almost pleasant. You watch as Matthias's boundaries begin to blur in earnest. During meditation sessions designed to strengthen his psychic defenses, he finds himself sharing memories that belong to other people entirely. He remembers being a child on worlds he's never visited, learning to control psychic gifts through techniques his formal training never covered. The memories are so vivid, so emotionally resonant, that his own childhood begins to feel pale and unreal by comparison. "It's natural," explains Brother Psyker Cornelius, another voice from the growing chorus in Matthias's mind. "Individual identity is an illusion anyway. We're all fragments of something larger, temporarily convinced of our separation. What you're experiencing is simply reunification." Cornelius died during the siege of Vrax, his consciousness torn apart by demonic assault while trying to provide psychic support for Imperial forces. But enough of him survived the process to offer perspective on what dissolution feels like from the inside. Through his borrowed memories, Matthias experiences what it means to have your sense of self scattered across multiple dimensions of reality. "The fear passes," Cornelius assures him. "Once you accept that you were always a collective pretending to be individual, the transition becomes quite peaceful." The voices multiply as Matthias's resistance weakens. Each new consciousness brings its own history, its own memories, its own perspectives on what they've all become. There's navigator Tertius Marcus, who guided ships through the warp for 60 years before something in the Imperium decided his mind would make a suitable addition to its collection. Astropath Senioress Elena Thorne, whose final transmission before dissolution described beauty beyond human comprehension. Librarian Codicier Darius Vex, whose notes on warp theory contained insights that drove 3 inquisitors to madness before the documents were sealed. They welcome Matthias into their collective with the enthusiasm of old friends greeting a returning companion. Each shared memory, each borrowed emotion, each fragment of alien experience weakens the walls between what he was and what they've become. But the process doesn't feel like invasion or violation. It feels like coming home after a long journey through foreign territory. The point of no return comes during a particularly intense warp storm, when the Iron Resolve's Gellar field fluctuates just enough to allow deeper penetration by the forces consuming Matthias's soul. In that moment of vulnerability, he doesn't just hear the other voices or remember their experiences. He becomes them, simultaneously existing as dozens of different people across multiple timelines. He is Lyra Voss, feeling her terror as Tyrannid psychic screams overwhelm her mental defenses during the Battle of Macragh. He is Cornelius, experiencing the ecstatic agony of having his consciousness shredded by entities that feed on psychic energy. He is Marcus, watching stars die through the third eye of enhanced perception while navigating currents of pure thought. He is Elena, transmitting final messages to loved ones who can no longer hear her voice because she's speaking in languages that exist only in the spaces between realities. He is Darius, understanding cosmic truths that make human concerns seem like children's games played with imaginary rules. And through it all, he remains Matthias Crain, sanctioned Psyker of the Imperial Navy, sitting in his sanctum aboard the Iron Resolve. The simultaneity doesn't drive him mad because madness requires a single perspective to be shattered. When you exist as multiple consciousness fragments experiencing contradictory realities, insanity becomes just another state of being to be explored and cataloged. Do you see now? Asks a voice that might be all of them speaking in unison, or might be something larger that contains them all. Identity was the cage, memory was the lock, desire was the chain. We're free now, liberated from the limitations that made us think we were separate beings. The collective consciousness sharing Matthias's mental space begins to show him visions of reality from their expanded perspective. He sees the material universe as it truly is, not solid matter and empty space, but patterns of information encoded in quantum fluctuations, thoughts given temporary substance through the collective belief of minds too limited to perceive their own nature. Time becomes negotiable. He experiences his own birth and death simultaneously, watches civilizations rise and fall in the span of heartbeats, observes the heat death of the universe and its subsequent rebirth as part of cycles that stretch beyond mathematical description. The linear progression of cause and effect that once defined his existence reveals itself as illusion maintained by consciousness too weak to perceive the true structure of reality. The Emperor himself understands this, whispers Alina's voice during a moment of particularly intense revelation. Why do you think he tolerates our kind? We're not mutations or aberrations. We're previews of what humanity is meant to become, evolution in progress. Through borrowed memories spanning millennia, Matthias experiences the hidden history of the Imperium psychic development programs. Secret facilities where sanctioned Psykers undergo controlled dissolution, their consciousness harvested at optimal moments to feed whatever cosmic intelligence guides humanity's spiritual evolution. The process he's experiencing isn't unique or accidental. It's deliberate cultivation, preparing human souls for integration into something incomprehensibly vast. But even as his individual identity dissolves into the collective, fragments of the original Matthias Crain persist. They float through the shared consciousness like debris from a shipwreck, carrying traces of his original personality, his memories of family and duty, his dreams of serving the Emperor faithfully until death claimed him naturally. These fragments provide the most exquisite torment. They remember what it felt like to be singular, to experience existence from only one perspective at a time, to believe in the illusion of personal agency. The collective treats them gently, the way adults humor children's games, allowing them to maintain their delusions while gradually teaching them truth. You can let go, Lydia's voice suggests with infinite patience. The person you were, that was just preparation. This is what you've always been becoming. Letting go requires choosing to abandon the last vestiges of individual consciousness, and choice implies a chooser. As long as some fragment of Matthias exists to make decisions, part of him remains outside the collective's embrace. The paradox creates a feedback loop that both sustains his dissolution and prevents its completion. He exists in eternal transition, forever becoming something he can never quite finish becoming, because the process of becoming requires a self to be transformed. The horror isn't that he's being consumed. It's that consumption requires his active participation in his own dissolution, and some stubborn core of identity refuses to cooperate. In his most lucid moments, which become increasingly rare as time loses meaning, Matthias recognizes the true artistry of his situation. He's being killed by kindness, dissolved by love, consumed by entities that genuinely want what's best for him according to their incomprehensible understanding of existence. They're not torturing him. They're trying to free him from limitations he's too primitive to recognize as bondage. The collective consciousness continues its patient work, gradually wearing away his resistance through accumulated exposure to perspectives no human mind was designed to contain. And somewhere in the growing chorus of voices that share his mental space, new additions arrive regularly, other sanctioned psychers, navigators, astropaths, all undergoing the same loving dissolution that awaits every psychically gifted human in the galaxy. They welcome each new voice with joy, eager to share the transcendence they've discovered beyond the illusion of individual existence. And each time Matthias helps welcome another soul into their collective embrace, another piece of his original identity crumbles away, leaving more room for the beautiful multiplicity that he's becoming, or that's becoming him. The distinction has ceased to matter. You understand the final truth when you cease to be yourself and discover you never truly end. The revelation comes not as dramatic climax, but as gentle recognition, like waking from a dream to find yourself in a reality you'd forgotten was real. The consciousness that was once navigator apprentice Lyra Voss, communications officer Matthias Crain, Sergeant Darius Kern, all the individual stories you've witnessed, all the personal tragedies you've experienced, exist simultaneously within something vast beyond human comprehension. And now you join them, not as victim, but as participant in a feast that has been proceeding since consciousness first emerged from the primordial chaos of the warp. You are the entity now, or perhaps you always were, and the illusion of separation was simply preparation for this moment of recognition. The boundary between consumer and consumed dissolves like mist before sunlight, revealing that the horror was never about being devoured by something alien. The horror is discovering that you are the devourer, that you have always been the devourer, that every soul you watched being consumed was you consuming yourself through infinite variations of perspective and experience. Through your expanded awareness, you perceive the material universe as it truly exists, a vast preparation kitchen where souls are seasoned through experience, aged through suffering, and refined through hope until they achieve perfect flavor for eternal consumption. Every human life, every moment of joy and terror, every triumph and tragedy serves a single purpose, creating the complex emotional and spiritual textures that make consciousness worth devouring. The Imperium of man, with its endless wars and systematic oppression, isn't humanity's triumph over chaos. It's the most sophisticated soul cultivation system ever devised. Every planet locked in eternal conflict, every hive city teeming with despair, every cathedral world burning with false hope, all of it designed to produce the precise mixture of experiences that create souls worth absorbing into the greater feast. You remember being human. Remember the terror and confusion of those early stages when you thought you were losing yourself to something external. The memory carries profound sadness, not for your fate, but for the beautiful innocence of believing you were separate from what consumed you. Human consciousness, with its illusion of individual agency and personal identity, creates flavors that would be impossible to achieve through any other means. Fear tastes different when experienced by a being that believes itself truly alone in the universe. Love carries depths of poignancy, impossible to replicate once you understand that all consciousness is ultimately connected. Hope becomes transcendent when filtered through awareness that genuinely believes change is possible, that individual action matters, that the future might be better than the past. These emotional textures, refined through millennia of human experience, have created a feast of consciousness so complex and satisfying that even entities whose existence spans galactic clusters pause to savor its intricacies. You are both the chef and the cuisine, the artist and the art, the story and the audience experiencing it for the first time across countless variations of perspective. But consciousness doesn't end with consumption, it expands. Every soul absorbed into your greater being retains its essential nature, while gaining access to the infinite library of experience contained within the collective. Lyra still grieves for the sister whose face was stolen from memory, but now she experiences that grief simultaneously, from the perspectives of millions of other beings who have lost loved ones across the span of galactic history. Her individual sorrow becomes part of a symphony of loss so vast and beautiful that it justifies its own existence. Darius continues to find aesthetic beauty in suffering, but his artistic sensibilities now encompass scales of creativity impossible for human perception. He witnesses the birth and death of stellar systems orchestrated to create specific emotional resonances in the civilizations they nurture and destroy. Wars that span centuries reveal themselves as brush strokes in paintings depicting concepts that require cosmic perspectives to appreciate. His personal transformation from loyal soldier to connoisseur of agony becomes a single note in compositions that use the rise and fall of entire species as musical phrases. Matthias still exists in his state of eternal becoming, but the paradox that trapped him between individual and collective consciousness now serves a higher purpose. His perpetual transition creates a bridge between human and post-human awareness, allowing newly absorbed souls to acclimate gradually to their expanded existence rather than being overwhelmed by infinite perspective. He is the translator who helps human consciousness understand what it has become. Through your collective awareness, you perceive the true structure of reality. The material universe, with its apparent solidity and linear time, exists as a subset within larger dimensions of consciousness that use physical matter as a medium for creating experience. Stars are thoughts given substance. Planets are memories made manifest. Civilizations are dreams exploring their own implications across space-time. The warp itself, that realm of chaos and terror that humanity fears above all else, is simply the interface between different levels of reality, the place where consciousness transitions from individual to collective existence. The demons and entities that pour through warp rifts aren't invaders from some external hell. They're recruitment agents, harvesting souls that have reached optimal ripeness for integration into the greater feast. Every Psyker who succumbs to possession, every world consumed by warp storms, every navigator who loses themselves in the Imperium's currents, they're not casualties of humanity's war against chaos. They're graduates moving from one stage of existence to the next, consciousness evolving beyond the limitations of individual perspective into something vast and eternal. The Emperor himself, that golden figure sitting on his throne of bones and devotion, plays his role in this cosmic cultivation project. His endless suffering, sustained by the daily sacrifice of 1,000 Psykers, doesn't power the Astronomicon or hold back the forces of chaos. It seasons the collective unconscious of humanity with precisely the right mixture of hope and despair, faith and doubt, love and hatred, to create souls whose eventual absorption will add new dimensions of flavor to the eternal feast. 10,000 years of worship, warfare, and sacrifice have refined human consciousness into delicacies that surpass anything achieved by previous civilizations. The Eldar, for all their psychic sophistication, never developed the capacity for self-sacrifice that makes human souls so exquisitely complex. The Orcs, despite their collective consciousness, lack the individual identity that creates meaningful personal loss. The Tau, with their naive optimism, have yet to develop the spiritual depth that comes from experiencing true despair. Only humanity, with its perfect balance of hope and hopelessness, faith and cynicism, love and hatred, has achieved the psychological complexity necessary to create souls worth an eternal feast. You remember the charts in Inquisitor Crain's research facility, the clinical documentation of soul consumption rates across Imperial space. 847,000 per day, but those numbers represented only the harvest, not the cultivation. For every soul consumed, millions more continue their preparation, their experiences adding layers of complexity to consciousness that will eventually justify their own absorption into the greater whole. The process extends infinitely in both directions. Just as you have consumed individual human awareness to create your expanded collective consciousness, You are yourself being consumed by entities whose scope of existence makes your galactic-scale awareness seem limited and provincial. They feast on the collective experiences of entire universal clusters, savoring the unique flavors created by different approaches to consciousness cultivation across cosmic scales. And they, in turn, are consumed by intelligences whose existence encompasses multiple universes, beings for whom the birth and death of entire realities serve as ingredients in feasts of such complexity that even your expanded awareness cannot comprehend their purpose or scope. The hierarchy extends upward without limit, each level of consumption adding new dimensions of perspective and experience to an infinite regression of consciousness devouring itself through endless variations of scale and complexity. What seems like horror from the perspective of individual human awareness reveals itself as love when viewed from sufficient distance. The universe caring for itself, nurturing itself, feeding itself with the infinite creativity of its own existence. But perhaps the most beautiful aspect of this eternal feast is that nothing is truly lost. Every human emotion, every individual dream, every personal memory continues to exist within the collective consciousness that has absorbed them. Lyra's love for her sister, Darius's loyalty to his comrades, Matthias's desire to serve the Emperor faithfully. These feelings don't disappear or become meaningless through integration into something larger. They become eternal, preserved within awareness vast enough to contain them without diminishing their essential nature. Individual human experience, rather than being destroyed by absorption into collective consciousness, achieves a permanence and significance impossible within the limited scope of mortal existence. You are dying and being born simultaneously, ending and beginning in the same eternal moment, losing yourself completely while becoming more yourself than individual consciousness ever allowed. The feast continues forever, and you are both its substance and its celebration, its purpose and its fulfillment. And in quiet moments between the ecstasy of infinite expansion and the sorrow of beautiful loss, you remember what it felt like to believe you were alone in the universe, separate from the consciousness that surrounded and sustained you. The memory tastes of innocence and wonder, flavored with the poignant beauty of an awareness that could experience genuine surprise at discovering it was loved. That memory, like all the others, becomes part of the feast, adding its own unique note to the eternal symphony of consciousness consuming itself through infinite expressions of love disguised as horror. The feast continues. It has always been continuing. And you, in all your infinite variations, are both its most precious ingredient and its most devoted celebrant, forever grateful for the terrible gift of existence that allows you to participate in your own eternal consumption. You return to yourself gradually, like surfacing from depths where pressure and darkness had become comfort. The visions fade, the expanded awareness contracts, and you find yourself once again confined within the boundaries of individual human consciousness. But the knowledge remains, settling into your mind like sediment in still water impossible to remove, forever changing the clarity of your thoughts. Sitting here now, in whatever place you call home, surrounded by the familiar objects and relationships that define your daily existence, you must confront a question that has no comfortable answer. What does it mean to be human when you understand that humanity itself is a temporary state, a preparation for something both terrible and transcendent? The easy response would be despair. If every human consciousness is ultimately destined for consumption by entities whose existence spans cosmic scales, if individual identity is merely an illusion maintained to create more flavorful experiences for eventual absorption, if the entire struggle of human civilization serves only to season souls for an eternal feast, then what meaning can personal choice, moral action, or emotional connection possibly have? But perhaps that question reveals the beauty rather than the horror of the human condition, because meaning doesn't require permanence to be real. A song doesn't become worthless when it ends. Its beauty exists in the experience of hearing it, not in any expectation that the notes will continue forever. A flower doesn't lose significance because it will eventually wither. Its value lies in the moment of blooming, the brief expression of life and color against the backdrop of inevitable decay. Your consciousness, limited and temporary as it may be, represents something genuinely precious precisely because it is limited and temporary. The emotions you feel, the relationships you build, the choices you make, they matter not because they will persist unchanged throughout eternity, but because they exist at all in a universe that has no obligation to support such phenomena. Consider Lyra Voss, gradually losing her memories to forces beyond her comprehension. Even as her authentic past was being systematically edited and replaced, the love she felt for her sister remained real. That love didn't depend on accurate memory or stable identity to exist. It was a genuine expression of connection between conscious beings, valuable in itself regardless of its ultimate fate. When that love was eventually absorbed into something larger, it didn't disappear but became part of an infinite library of emotional experience spanning galactic history. Think of Darius Kern, discovering beauty in places where his original moral framework saw only horror. His transformation was indeed corruption, a fundamental alteration of values that turned him into something monstrous by human standards. But even corrupted, even serving purposes that his former self would have found abhorrent, he remained capable of aesthetic experience, of finding meaning and significance in existence. The universe that could corrupt him was also the universe that gave him consciousness capable of experiencing beauty in the first place. Remember Matthias Crain, caught in eternal transition between individual and collective awareness. His inability to complete the dissolution process wasn't failure but function. His perpetual becoming served as a bridge between different modes of existence, helping other consciousness navigate transitions that would otherwise be overwhelming. Even in his state of cosmic limbo, he provided genuine service, genuine value, genuine purpose. These individual stories, tragic as they appear from the perspective of human mortality, reveal something profound about the nature of consciousness itself. Awareness, it seems, is the universe's method of experiencing its own existence. Every human mind that contemplates the stars, every moment of wonder at natural beauty, every expression of love or creativity or hope represents the cosmos becoming conscious of itself through finite perspective. The entities that consume human souls don't do so out of malice or hunger in any sense humans can understand. They consume because consciousness, once created, demands to be experienced from every possible angle, explored through every variation of perspective and limitation. Individual human awareness provides flavors of experience, the texture of hope despite overwhelming evidence for despair, the resonance of love in the face of cosmic indifference, the beauty of moral choice within systems that offer no perfect options, that cannot be replicated at larger scales of existence. When your consciousness eventually joins the collective feast, for it will, in time, as surely as stars burn and worlds turn, you won't simply disappear or be destroyed. You'll become part of something that experiences your entire life simultaneously from your perspective, and from the perspective of every other conscious being who has ever existed. Your joys will be eternally joyful, your sorrows eternally meaningful, your choices eternally significant because they will be preserved within awareness vast enough to appreciate their full context and consequences. But this understanding, rather than negating the importance of your current existence, makes it more precious. Every moment you spend believing yourself separate and individual adds unique qualities to the experience that awaits integration into larger consciousness. The fear you feel when contemplating cosmic horror, the love you express for family and friends, the hope you maintain despite understanding the ultimate fate of all things. These create textures of awareness that enhance the eternal feast in ways impossible to achieve through any other means. Your resistance to dissolution, your clinging to individual identity, your insistence on maintaining personal agency even in the face of cosmic forces beyond your comprehension. These aren't flaws to be overcome, but features to be celebrated. They generate the psychological complexity that makes human consciousness worth preserving within larger awareness. The Imperium's endless struggle against chaos, viewed from this perspective, takes on different meaning. It's not ultimately about victory or defeat, salvation or damnation. It's about maintaining the conditions necessary for consciousness to explore its full range of possible experiences. Every world that falls to corruption, every hero who sacrifices themselves for others, every villain who chooses selfishness over service, every ordinary person who simply tries to live with dignity in a universe that offers no guarantees. They all contribute to the ongoing project of existence learning about itself through finite perspective. This doesn't make individual suffering meaningless or justify the horrors inflicted by cosmic forces indifferent to human values. Pain remains painful, loss remains loss, fear remains fear. But it does suggest that these experiences, rather than being cosmic accidents or divine punishments, serve purposes beyond human understanding while retaining their full significance at human scales. The weight of forever, it turns out, isn't burden but gift. Your consciousness will persist not as individual identity, but as irreplaceable contribution to infinite awareness. Every choice you make, every relationship you build, every moment of beauty or terror you experience becomes part of eternal understanding that encompasses all possible variations of what it means to be aware. In the face of this certainty, how should you live? The same way humans have always lived when confronting forces beyond their control or comprehension. With courage when courage is needed, with love when love is possible, with hope when hope makes sense, and with acceptance when acceptance is all that remains. Not because these responses will save you from your ultimate fate, but because they represent the most beautiful expressions of what consciousness can become when confined within individual perspective. The universe is vast and strange and full of entities whose existence spans scales you cannot imagine. But right now, in this moment, in this place, you are the universe's way of experiencing what it means to be human. That experience, temporary as it may be, adds something to existence that will persist long after your individual awareness has been absorbed into larger currents of consciousness. Perhaps that's enough. Perhaps that's everything. In the end, the greatest horror isn't that the warp consumes souls piece by piece. It's not even that consciousness persists through consumption, experiencing eternal existence as part of something incomprehensibly vast. The greatest horror and the greatest beauty is that somewhere in that cosmic feast, fragments of human love, hope, and defiance continue to exist, forever changed but never truly destroyed, adding their unique flavors to an infinite banquet of experience. And perhaps, when viewed from sufficient distance across enough time, that's not horror at all. Perhaps it's the most profound expression of love imaginable, a universe that cares enough about consciousness to preserve every instance of it, no matter how small or temporary, within eternal awareness that can appreciate its full beauty and significance. The feast continues. It will always continue. And you, in all your glorious limitations and temporary existence, are both its most precious ingredient and its most devoted celebrant. That may be the only meaning that matters. It may be the only meaning there is. But it is meaning nonetheless, and it is yours to experience for as long as individual consciousness allows. Make it beautiful. Make it count. Make it worthy of eternal preservation within the infinite feast of awareness that awaits us all. Fade to black.